I believe Zoom is connecting.
It looks like it.
Yes. Yep, I think we are pretty much online. So, John, let's dive into, well, topic is quite familiar for us. We are digging and digging week after week, and I'm looking forward to hear your story, because usually, as we discovered already, the stories has quite a powerful multi-layered impact on how we perceive and how we interpret the world. And tell me, please, how would you like to proceed with today's topic?
Well, thank you, Alex. I think what was very interesting, if people tune back to your story that you shared last week, it inspired me. And what was fascinating is how my own story came up after hearing yours, and as kind of a reminder of what happened to me as a child, and then how it kind of projected out through my life. And so much of this is what you talked about last week, about reflecting on these experiences that we've had. Um, and so I guess I'll just start with the fact of how this all begins. And the content of this story is around water, and it's around my experience with water. And when I was about 2 or 3 years old, I was born and raised for the beginning part of my life in California. And at that age, my mother and my baby brother had gone over to a friend's house, and my mother was actually taking care of the kids. The parents of the children had gone out of town. My mother agreed to take care of all the kids, and I think there were probably 4 or 5 kids, all of varying ages. And as I said, I was somewhere between 2 and 3, and clearly I was able to walk. And really the essence of the story goes like this: that with all the chaos that was going on, with all these kids, in the house and running around, I somehow quietly made my way to the pool by myself.
Wow.
And what happened is that I went into the pool, and I vividly, and most people don't really understand how I can remember this, but I do. But I remember being in the water, and I remember looking down in the water and seeing the grate at the bottom of the pool. But what I really remember seeing is how the light was reflecting in the pool. And I remember being at complete sense of peace. I do not remember any fear, but what I do remember is this really this big sense of peace and calm. From what my mother tells me, they don't know how long I was in there, but when they finally realized I was missing, they all ran out to the pool, and they pulled me out, and they got me breathing again. And it was that moment, and there was mass hysteria, right? My mother, I'm sure, was crying, screaming. The kids were upset. And I don't remember much after that. But what stuck with me was this idea of the chaos that ensued afterwards. And this kind of this reaction to what had happened. So what I think had happened is I connected with that chaos, and I connected with that reaction, as opposed to the water as being something that was scary. But somehow in that little world that I was in, I saw them both equally scary. I saw water as being scary, and I saw this fear these people had as being scary. So I in turn created that fear in myself. And it wasn't until I was probably about 6 or 7 years old, and I had gone in water, but I never went into the water again, like below my head. I would put my feet in the water. And my mother decided it was a good idea for me to learn how to swim. And I remember this vividly as well. And that was standing on the edge of the pool, a big, big pool. And there was the coach, the swimming coach and his wife who was in the pool. And the coach kept saying, jump in, jump in. And we were supposed to go under the water and get to his wife who was standing much further back. And I remember that pure fear. And here I was again, now having to go into that water. I had not been in that water again. And I remember him saying, you have to jump in. It was this chaos again that was happening from this external part of what was happening. And I remember jumping in the water, and I remember that moment where it was probably a little post-traumatic of being underneath. And I remember the fact that I just didn't think that I was going to make it. And I just remember seeing, because I had my eyes open, the woman reaching out to me and picking me up. And I just screamed and cried because I was so afraid. And I remember her holding me and telling me that it was going to be okay. And I remember her kissing me on my cheek. And I remember that softness of what happened in that moment, you know. And so that was another piece that stuck with me, because there was this chaos that was going on. And I kind of go through these themes, but I still didn't kind of put things together. But I still saw water as kind of this, I don't want to call it the enemy, but it was something that there was still fear around. And then my mother decided that it was time for me to be on the swim team, because I was old enough to join the swim team.
Wow, your mother is something. I mean, sorry.
So, but yeah, so, you know, but I never expressed that fear. It's just that she saw, and maybe in her own way, she saw this was the way for me to move through this fear that was happening. And interestingly enough, is that by that time, I was a little heavier. You know, in swimmers, you know, the swimmers' bodies, they're usually tall and thin. I am not tall and thin. And clearly back then in my preteens, I was not tall and thin. And my coach was so amazing, because he kept encouraging me, you know, to get into the water and to swim. And I was actually a really good swimmer, and I was excellent in the water. But again, there was always this negativity around water. But what I kept thinking about was, it was always these external forces that were happening. You know, I was picked on because I was heavier, and he would just constantly encourage me. He would constantly support me. And so, you know, throughout my life, I recognized that, you know, this kind of theme of water was so fascinating, because I was always around water. And slowly but surely, I began to release kind of that fear, and seeing water as almost a friend, as something that would comfort me. Partially because I also stuck with these moments where in that water and around that water, I was being comforted by people. Yeah. I was being supported. So I began to shift how I saw water. And maybe water was kind of the metaphor for what was happening in the world around me. I don't know, but somehow I began to see water as something that was comfortable. And so what ends up happening later in my life is that something turned. And when I was very young, in this same kind of teenage, I was in a pool. And here I was in the deep end of the pool, because I knew how to swim. I was a great swimmer. And as I looked under the water, there was a little boy who was going under. And the pool was full, so no one could see what was happening. And he was drowning.
Wow.
Yeah. I didn't expect to get emotional. This is very interesting. But the part of me, just like when that woman reached out to me, I did the same for him. And I just remember him struggling, and I kept thinking, nobody's looking, and there was a lifeguard and nobody's doing anything. And so I got under him, under the water, and I carried him, literally just carried him out to the shallow part. And I was young, so I was so afraid that I was going to get in trouble. Somehow in my mind, I was going to get in trouble. And I remember when he got to the shallow part where he could stand and he, began to breathe, he got out of the pool and he found his parents who were somewhere outside. And I remember them coming over and they were pointing at me. And I thought, I'm in trouble. What ended up happening is that their gratitude for what I did, he told them what I did. And they poured out their gratitude and thanks to me. My mother she was there too. She didn't witness this, but it was a pivotal moment in that it was almost like I was giving something back to what I had been given, as this
Wow.
little child. And I'll finish this last story with, this idea of the gratitude that was placed on me and how, again, here was water that I was in, that I was using to save somebody. I was in this space again. And then when I was a teenager, we were at a camp, and one of my friends, it was in the middle of winter, and one of my friends fell into the icy pond.
Wow.
And I remember everybody standing there. We were on a deck, and it was frigid cold, and everybody standing there. And I just jumped in. She went under the ice and she went under the water, and I jumped in and I pulled her out.
Wow. That's,
Yeah. So
I didn't expect you are coming with such a powerful stuff. Wow, you are you're supposed to be like a national hero. You are saving lives. No, this is really amazing. This is really, well, I mean, to be honest, frozen stuff is I'm kind of familiar with, and I know how dangerous it is. Actually, we are not recommended to jump there because, no, I mean, we are dropping on our belly, belly,
That's right.
start kind of approaching to that, because you could end up exactly in the same place, and both cannot get out, and people who are kind of drowning, they actually start grabbing you and you go
That's right.
together with them. It's
That's
really
right.
tough stuff.
That's
Wow.
right. Yeah. It I think, in those moments, it was, first, I see all of these moments as being given somewhat of a gift, in transcending from that fear to helping others. And I think that even when I put myself, at risk, especially at that last venture, whenever I jumped in to help her. And so I was trying to it's interesting to reflect on this, because as you shared with me about the ball and how, it connected with your values, I began to really think about how did all of these experiences around water, kind of transform me in some way, because it was very much about fear, and it very much was around the chaos that was happening around me. And I think I was able to separate out the water from the world, that the water was actually not my enemy. And nothing was really my enemy, but I saw the water as something that was negative. But over time, it became, I don't know, I still am trying to identify what it represents. But I do know that with all those experiences that I had, kind of being lifted out, and lifted up, how fascinating and not really surprising, probably, that that's what I do, and that's what I continue to do in my life for others. And again, I've been trying to really reflect on, like, what does this mean? But that representation, and thinking about that moment when I was a child in the water and not being afraid, but yet somehow the world impacted me enough to be afraid,
That's very interesting part, which I wanted actually to ask you, because it's kind of fascinating that when, like, there is a, when we are in our, I would say, like a true self, I believe our true self probably not very talkative, or not talking at all. So when you are just observing, you describe that experience when you fell or into the water and you were not afraid, and you actually were at that point paying attention to, I don't know, how the light is kind of reflecting in the water, or and so as a result, it's according to your description, there was no really fear, and suddenly later, when mental part, or a reaction of people around and all that hysteria kind of and chaos, and that's what somehow produced the impact. So it's kind of, it seems like it came from other sorts, like I don't know, the maybe language, maybe behavior of other people, maybe. So as a result, you connected the first part of your experience, which had no fear, but you connected it with fear based on almost like some kind of reference point. If other people are right now afraid is screaming, probably I supposed to kind of be afraid. So you become. And yeah, this is really amazing. This is really interesting, extremely interesting point. And also very interesting point, I found that the water is kind of coming back and back and back in your life, and somehow from fear and overcoming fear, and you kind of getting into the pattern of giving back and recover other people, and kind of return that amazing gift. I would call it gift, because as a result, you have a practically gift from that situation, even though it seems like a very negative one, but you turned it into the something which very, very powerful. I mean, we are talking about actually saving lives. It's not like I was playing football. Come on, I mean, I lose the ball. Yeah, I think it's not fair. Your story is like 10 times powerful than mine.
But I think I appreciate you saying that, actually, because in a way, I think what's important is what happened, because when you shared your story, it's not that one is, yes, maybe the intensities of the stories or there's deep, one might be deeper than the other, right? But what happened is that when you shared your story, I reflected on myself. I listened to you, and I think this is the power that storytelling can have.
Yeah.
And when I listened to you, wow, what really came up for me was that moment of being a child in that pool. And then I started thinking about all the things that have that around water in my life, because water has always been a theme, but I was starting to connect it all. And I'll share with you, I think that moment when I jumped into the pond, I think that was the moment that all of this was broken. It was me letting go, because everyone was almost paralyzed, and there were some kids that were much bigger than me and stronger than me, but there was something in that moment, you know, and if we call it something bigger and higher than ourselves, just as I would say that something bigger and higher than myself happened when I was very young,
Yeah.
because the fact that I was found in time meant something.
Yeah.
And in that moment of jumping in the pond, something, there wasn't a thought. It just was, this is what I have to do. And I
Yeah.
think some way I broke that chain, um, because I wasn't concerned about the others, you
Yeah.
know, and I didn't want to join them in their, what are we going to do? She's going under the ice. It
Yeah.
was me going in. And as I reflected too, I remember vividly last year, um, going to our community pool, and they have adult swim, so it's just the adults, so there's very few people in the pool. And it was a beautiful, beautiful summer day, and the sun was shining and blue sky, and I realized I love to go under the water, and I love to try to stay down there as long as I
Wow.
can.
Wow.
And
Definitely broken
what
pattern. Yeah.
yeah, and what happened is that all those rays of light were shining down there, and next to where I was swimming was a grate, and it was so fascinating to me that that was exactly what I saw as the two and a half year old.
Wow.
But yes, and it brought me back to that moment, but I was at such peace in that moment of just experiencing that light. And I kept thinking, this is something bigger than me. This is, and how interesting, you know, 50 plus years later, here I am in this pool, going back to this moment of being this child. Um, and again, if we, in a way, allow ourselves to let go, um, and move beyond kind of that chaos, right, that's going around us. And what I recognized was what you just said, Alex, is that quiet time for ourselves. Um, that's when things happen, and we've talked a lot about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, you know, again, it's, I was trying to connect it. I think, you know, part of it was that the lessons of all of this were so much about supporting others. And I almost use this idea of lifting people from the deepest parts into the shallow, so that they can stand more firmly. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean you're completely getting them out of the water. It just means that you've helped them move to this place where they can catch their breath,
Yeah.
um, a place where they can feel a little bit more peaceful.
Yeah.
You know, I can't fix everything, but what I can do is support and
Yeah.
connect with them. And that's I think what, you know, as I think about that little boy, you know, who wasn't much younger than I was, but for me to move him from the deep part to the shallow part, um, it just reminded me of the work that I do now. And I have to believe that those experiences, um, have informed who I am. Um, but mostly, I think this idea of when we do let go, we allow for the opportunity to have some kind of transformation or some kind of opening, um, to allow growth,
Yeah.
whatever that may be. I don't know. So
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. You are connecting again. You are finding new and new. I would say analogies or metaphorical or yeah layers of the story. I agree. I mean the moving or helping people to move from deep waters to not so deep, where they can handle a little bit already by themselves. And this is really powerful analogy. I agree. Tell me, please, I'm curious, what do you think right now when the pattern and the whole kind of fear already broken and it's not haunting you in any possible way? Do you think, have you finished your relationship with the water? Or I would say special relationship?
I see water. I'm so connected to water that I see it. Um, I see it as something quite powerful. It's interesting, and not to get into kind of religion or too much of the depths of that, but if we think about, and I hadn't really thought about this, but I think when we think about, say, Christianity or even just
baptizing,
baptism, the use of water as something sacred and holy, and something that can heal. Water also, we have to have water, right, to live.
Well, we are practically water. And I mean, someone said that human being is the drop of water.
It's right.
Which learned, how to move on a dry land. Yeah, that's true.
That's right. So even with that, it makes sense of how I see water, because we are water, right? And I think the other deep aspect, just outside of the water, is these moments of life, and the realities, and the preciousness of life, and these moments that, as we see, can we don't know, what's going to happen. And in these moments, it's not about me. It's just that little boy could have drowned, and my friend could have drowned. That could have been the part of their lives, and it wasn't meant to be. So what it also made me see is the somewhat fragility of life, but the preciousness of it. And I suppose that's also, and that's tied to the water, but that's also what I believe kind of moved me to do the kind of work that I do, because it's about these precious lives, right, that I see around me, and how am I going to show up and support people when they're at a place where they're struggling, or at a place where they may not know how to move forward. So I don't know. It's a deep one. I knew it would be with me, but just I think the message of how do you reflect on some of these moments in your life and kind of see how things are connected on this journey, and what do you take away, maybe even from the scariest of things and the most fearful of things, and how might that letting go and allow you to open up and transform. And I just believe that part of this is about moving from there and moving towards others, and helping others in some way. But clearly these experiences moved me into that place in my journey. I always have been like that, but I think later on in life, I allowed it to finally really come out. And surface.
Very nice. I mean, the water story is quite fascinating, and it seems like, it has some kind of duration in your life, because it's somehow it was evolving, transforming, and as you said, you felt you finally released some kind of negative part, at least when you jumped last time, or jumped in that pond during kind of winter or freezing kind of period. So and helping people and water, and what we associate with the experience is kind of also, what for me also, apart from all that deep stuff, like an obvious one, in terms of saving people and helping them, this is definitely, but also for me quite fascinating is the fact that we can almost like we are touching meaning later.
Mhm.
And if you would have a choice at that moment what meaning to attach, probably you would choose not to attach any negative one. But at that point, when you are 3 years old boy and the parents are screaming and panicking around you, of course, yeah, that's not probably a choice, unless you are, maybe tiny Buddha already. But yeah,
Maybe.
probably you just kind of, okay, everything is fine. I'm chill. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's really amazing, really amazing. Thank you
it
for
is.
sharing. And it's
Yeah.
again, you see the chain reaction when you are telling now your story. Like I'm reflecting, and my mind already come up with 2, 3 more stories, also from childhood, and also like a 4 or 5 years old, but and different form, shape, kind of. It's actually snow. so,
Mhm.
so it's also water but frozen, okay. I mean, if you're gonna have time, I will share that story, because it's also kind of very close to death kind of
Yeah,
situation, but
yeah,
related to snow.
yeah.
And yeah, that's really amazing
But
how we are hearing story and immediately kind of something takes, no, it's we are reacting, and stuff starts to come up or on the surface, and immediately stories are triggering, some kind of associations, and yeah, it's amazing, powerful effect. No wonder stories are so powerful. Yeah, thank you
absolutely.
for sharing.
No, thank you, Alex. It is. It's powerful, and I think it can have this kind of chain reaction,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and allowing us to reflect a little bit on our lives,
yeah,
and really see these moments that sometimes we don't give credit for, maybe
yeah,
actually creating some change, or some
yeah.
shift in our lives, and also how sometimes things are connected, but they
Oh,
change over time.
I remember that Steve Jobs kind of connecting dots kind of speech. I remember he was giving speech in some university or on graduation, and there was a really amazing on YouTube about connecting dots. So he was like, yeah, dropping out of I don't know, high school, and then suddenly started to kind of go to the calligraphy, and then it's like almost like a random thing. But at some point, everything got clicked together, and everything become suddenly making sense, because later in his activity he needed design, he needed that. It's like it's those random things seems like standing apart suddenly clicked into one big beautiful picture.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's what also right now when you're reflecting, and you have like a power to, I don't know, to maybe spot some pattern or connect things or see some kind of theme which is going on and on and on. Or yeah, that's a power of reflection, because we are able to see something which very often we are not capable, when not all pieces are kind of already in place, because it's a little bit too early.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's extremely powerful. And I think and especially right now, I think this is an interesting exercise. If people are able to take a moment, and think about, as some of these fears come up, but, kind of what some of those stories in their lives, and to see what may connect, and how, what you said is each individual thing feels random, but most likely not. they all somehow, if we give ourselves that time to think about it,
Exactly.
reflect, there's some connection.
But you see, the point is, I remember in our previous talks, I kind of mentioned kind of my technique, or like a simple technique. I call it gapping, like a gap, or pause. There are different words for that, but I think it's like when we have experience, and usually normal reaction is immediately attach some kind of meaning, which is usually very trivial and common. Like if situation is bad, you're immediately and attaching some kind of bad feeling or a bad meaning to it. But if we, for a second, 2, 3, kind of stop ourselves and just for the sake of exercise, like what if I'm not attaching right now anything? What if it's this is experience, and it could have 25 different meanings later. Why would I be right now in a rush of attaching, some particular one, especially when it's negative? What if I am kind of postpone it for a while? And I think that's where the magic potentially could be, because then we become kind of like a free from reactive type of attachments, which is almost like kind of animal kind of type of, something is jumping at you, you scared, I think that's very, because when you mentioned that you were drowning, but it reminded me one story. I think I'm not. My wife actually told me. I haven't read it, but I think the Edison, the one who invented the bulb, the electrical bulb, and at some period of life, I think all his laboratory like was literally burned to ground. I mean, and it was a disaster, literally. All his kind of, I don't know, experiments and like 10 years of work and assets and like everything he lost everything in one night. And I think the story was that when he was looking at that laboratory burning already, because it was not possible to stop at that point, and because there were a lot of chemicals there, it actually was, different, how to say, the flames were not simple, they were actually colorful. So what Edison was looking and say that, wow, it's so beautiful. I mean, all those colors. I mean, no, can you imagine, when all your kind of assets and all your, I don't know, whatever, money literally burning right now, would you be able to notice how beautiful it is? That's for me, it's like wow, he just didn't attach to that terrible terrible event the meaning which every normal person would attach. Disaster, he was paying attention to how beautiful it is. That's fascinating. I mean, that's the freedom which we really have, to choose what to attach to experience. And that's what, when you explain your story and you said you were actually looking at the light and not afraid at all during, when you were drowning, and then later somehow you were practically forced to attach. And that's kind of incredible. It reminded me, that we do have quite a freedom. Imagine going through life free from those reactive attachments. That's quite a journey. I mean, that would be like a high awareness journey. Yeah.
That's powerful.
Thank you, John. Yeah. So I am sure that we could continue. There are lots of things. Your story triggered lots of layers, and I think we need to I'm going to definitely sleep on it, and I'm sure that usually story continue to work, somewhere on the background. So Thank you very much for sharing, and looking forward to have another conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you, John. Have a nice day.
You
Yeah,
too.
bye.
Bye-bye.